Hello folks, Jerry here and welcome to a very simple video. So as you guys might have seen, I have been posting these polls basically asking you guys what your favorite cars back on the Racing Rivals were, and today we're gonna go through some of these results because I think that they are quite fascinating. So I've been posting these polls for like 2 weeks now, so we have quite a bunch of results to get through and some of them are quite interesting. I suppose I should let you guys know that if you guys want to vote on these, you can just go on my channel on the community tab and you can basically vote on new sets of cars every single day. So let's start off with the very first poll. Now most of these polls have been getting around 200 votes, which is honestly amazing, and I think it's a really good sample size to basically figure out, you know, what the favorite cars of Racing Rivals were. Very first matchup, actually I was quite surprised. Now for the first 2 days basically, you know, I didn't exactly know what I was doing, so I basically, you know, matched cars from different classes against each other, which I'm not sure if that was the best way to go. But in this case, I was quite surprised because the Scion FRS ended up getting over half the votes. Quite impressive, honestly. I was thinking that the Datsun was going to be the favorite, but in the end, it still came to, and the Neon SRT4 and the Corolla, much as on Racing Rivals, unfortunately ended up being forgotten. Next up, we do have a bunch of campaign cars and the Genesis BTR as well, inexplicably. I mean, I'm not sure what I was doing with that one, but the Challenger actually ended up dominating out of these 4 cars. It's quite a shame because, you know, my very first memories of Racing Rivals were actually with the Mazda RX-8, because that was, you know, sort of the star in my very first Racing Rivals video, but unfortunately that only got 16% of the votes, which means that it has been eliminated along with the Subi Impreza as well. It's a shame because basically in the first 2 days, 2 of the 3 B-Class campaign cars ended up being eliminated, but considering that, you know, the other B-Class campaign car is the Evo 8, I'm pretty sure that car has a much better shot. So day 3 is when I realized that, hey, you know, maybe I should put similar cars against each other. So I ended up basically making a poll of all of these Street Edition cars, because there were exactly 4, and it was very interesting to actually watch the votes on this one, because at the very beginning the Firebird actually ended up dominating, having like 40% of the votes, and the Charger was actually battling against the Mustang, and it was really close, but then somehow just Charger like pressed the NOS button and ended up getting half the votes. And the Corvette, I mean, it's a really cool looking car, but it wasn't as iconic, and it just ended up being demolished here. But the Firebird and the Charger have in fact moved on. And this next poll, I really thought it was going to be very interesting, and it was the closest matchup so far. Now the Skyline ended up dominating, taking like half the votes, but the battle against the Cyclone and the Evo Year of the Monkey edition was actually quite close. I think it's a shame with the Javelin. I think it was a very iconic car, but in a matchup such as this, it unfortunately really didn't have a chance. So the Javelin was eliminated, and eventually the Year of the Monkey Evo ended up taking over the Cyclone as well. Next up, you know, sometimes I really can't make polls which aren't you know, heavily weighted against some cars, which is exactly what happened over here, because as soon as I put the Stella and the Rotana against the Remencha and the Refretum, it was obvious which cars, you know, were going to win. And I think this was basically like the most two-sided poll of any of them, because the Refretum and the Rami only ended up getting 14% of the votes, with the Stella basically getting twice the votes of the Rotana. But you know, that's what happens. I mean, some cars are just going to be more iconic, but obviously all of these were pretty freaking great. Next up, a battle of the C-Class cars. So I don't think it's a massive shock that SVT Cobra ended up dominating with 60% of the votes. But the MR2 Turbo was a fantastic car. It wasn't quite as useful as the other cars because it ended up being introduced like a couple of years into the game's life cycle, but the Golf GTI and the 128 really didn't have much of a chance. and they were eliminated. Next up is actually one of the more curious rounds. I really thought that this one was going to be very even, and in some aspects it actually was. Now the WRC 2006 was the heavy favorite and it did end up winning, but the second place battle was actually quite close between the Camaro SS and the M3, and I have to admit I was really rooting for the M3 because it was one of the most underrated cars in racing rivals in my opinion, but in the end, you know, underrated is not gonna get you the votes, so the Camaro ended up winning, and the 370Z, much as on racing rivals, it really just didn't have much of a chance. Next up, a couple of R2 class BMWs, and this one was basically a heartbreaker round because all of the cars on here, the M6, the Z4, the M4 Racing and the M3 Rivals Edition, are very iconic, and what ended up happening is that the M3 Rivals Edition did end up basically stealing the show with the M6 G3 somehow sneaking through, so I just want to basically give a moment of silence to the M4 Racing because that was a fantastic car. Now, the Z4 G3 has always been shit, but it was very iconic, so it is kind of sad to honestly see it go, you know, with the least amount of votes in the very first round it was on, but it's what happens, you know. Next up, basically the most one-sided matchup that we have seen so far. The Murcielago ended up getting 74% of the votes on this one, which is absolutely insane, but what's even more interesting is that we have a tie. So 253 votes, and the SL65 Black Series and the Hellcat are tied. Now it's been very curious basically watching these two battle it out because, you know, for some of the time the Hellcat was in front and then the SL65 was in front with the California just, you know, being somewhere there, but I'm personally still rooting for the SL65, so you guys, in case you haven't voted, you can basically go ahead and vote on this, and you know, one of these two is going to move on and we're still not sure which one, but personally I'm kind of rooting for the SL65. I just love that car. Next up, we have a bunch of R3 class Koenigseggs, and I think it's fairly easy to assume that less is more over here because basically the original K1, the first introduced R3 class Koenigsegg, was in fact the heavy favorite over here because, you know, the more special editions that you release, the less significant they're gonna be, and it doesn't really matter which one was the quickest for this, it matters which one was the most iconic, and that was definitely the 1-2-1 with the Agera RS getting that second place. Now, the very next day we ended up having the very first repeat of a car that was previously in a matchup. So the Datsun 510 did get one win, but unfortunately it just barely got edged out for the second round. Now I really didn't expect the CRX to dominate and basically take half the votes, but for the for the second place, the battle was actually pretty close, with the Dart getting just 2% over the Datsun. And the Focus was actually in the race as well. I mean, I do have to admit that I was actually kind of rooting for the Focus Titanium because it was the quickest D-Class car back when the game originally released, so I do have some fond memories of that. But it is what it is. I mean, it's all of the cars here basically put on a good show, and that's what you really want to see. Next up, R2 class, and this one was, I think, honestly the most surprising round because I did not expect the Agera RS Nereo to basically take 60% of the votes and like completely demolish everything else. I was thinking that the TLX was going to win, and I mean it did ended up getting second place with 20% of the votes, but I am kind of shocked that the Renault RS01 only got 8% of the votes and is therefore eliminated. I think that car was pretty iconic, but oh well. I mean, the Lycan really wasn't as I guess prestigious as the Veneer was, so that was eliminated. You know, it's what happens. Next up, another massive surprise, and that is that the Gallardo Superleggera actually wasn't eliminated, because I really thought that people didn't like that car because there were like 20 different turf wraps of it, but it seems that people actually quite like that one, so it moved on along with the M2 Race Edition, obviously. But I think it's pretty sad because much like the A-Class Nissan 370Z, that Turf Edition was also basically eliminated in the very first round. And also it's a shame about the Javelin Race Edition because, I mean, obviously, you know, your heart was going to be broken anyway here because all of these were some pretty iconic cars, but the Superleggera and the M2 move to fight another day. Next up, B-Class battle. So I think we're getting pretty close to actually having the finale of the whole B-Class saga, but as it turns out, the Lotus Exige, which was the quickest B-Class car on Racing Rivals, ended up being eliminated with the least amount of votes on the very first round it was on. So it really, you know, even though it was a pretty cool car and it was very unique to drive, it didn't really stand much of a chance against the, the Blob-Eye WRX STI, which was one of my favorite cars, so I love to see that car move on, along with the second win for the Year of the Monkey Evo against the Camaro Z28. I really didn't expect the Year of the Monkey Evo to be the first car to take 2 wins, but honestly, I really like to see it because I love that Evo as well. Next up, so Rotana got around 30% of the votes behind the Stella in the very first round it was on, but for the second round it absolutely dominated, took 60% of the votes, so yeah, I think that RWBs are quite a force to be reckoned with. The other car that moved on here was the C-Class DTM, very happy about that one. I think it's a car that has very much of a unique identity, so I'm happy that it moved on as well, and the Huracan and the Fireburst 3 edition were unfortunately eliminated. Next up, we have a battle of the X-Class cars. I think that's going to be like 2 more rounds of X-Class cars because there really weren't many in the game. What is shocking though is that both the BMWs ended up being eliminated. The 3.0 CSL Homage honestly was a really cool looking car that was very useful in the lower lobbies. So it's a shame to see that, you know, not come to you, but it is what it is. I am still very happy about the Peugeot Onyx moving on though, because I have a lot of fond memories with that car. So that's pretty cool to see. Also the WRX concept, very cool looking as well. And the final matchup that we will have for this video is basically the C-Class battle. So the Scion actually moves on and gets a second win again against the MR2 Turbo and the Pontiac Firebird, which unfortunately do not move on. But the car that ended up dominating over here is the Charger RT. I mean, it was a campaign car. I think it's the, yeah, basically 2 of the C-Class campaign cars survive. So that's the FRS and the Charger, while the RX-8 was eliminated very early on. So that's basically it as far as the current votes go. If you guys want to cast your votes, go ahead and make sure to cast them. So here's what we are currently looking like for today. It's actually a very close battle. I think that the Veneno is probably going to be the car that definitely moves on. What a sentence. But for the second place, it's actually very close between the Sesto Elemento and the Daim Huracan. And the Centenario not looking so good. It's curious. I was actually expecting the Sesto and the Daim to actually take the first and second. And I'll just give you guys a quick, basically, preview of some of the things to come if you guys are interested. We're actually gonna be wrapping out B-Class very quickly over here in just like a week or 2, and some other whoops votes as well. Yeah, this isn't gonna be like the most high budget video, but that's okay because this is just for fun. So hopefully you guys are enjoying these polls. I will continue to obviously post them. My name is Jerry, and yeah, I'll see you guys again very soon. Bye bye.